Hey guys, this is probably the last video I'll make for this quarter. Um, Last time I read chapter 8, Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, and it's a long one, and that was a long video because I wanted to cover all the details. That's really like the climax of the story when they break down the door and they find him. It's a big deal. Now, just to recap, in case you missed that or you forgot, the butler, Mr. Poole, comes to Mr. Utterson, and he says, someone is in Jekyll's office, but it's not Jekyll. And he keeps asking for stuff, and he keeps hiding when we look. He's treating it like an imposter, like the big bad wolf and the grandmother. Utterson thinks it's probably him. Maybe he's got some disease or drug that's messed with his appearance, but it's probably still him. And they end up breaking down the door, and they find Mr. Hyde dead on the floor. No sign of Jekyll, although they assume he must be hidden somewhere. They're worried that Hyde has killed him or, threatened him in some way. And they see a message that says, hey, read that thing from Dr. Lanyon. So in chapter 9, that's what they do. Chapter 9 says we're going to read the letter from Dr. Lanyon. And it says, again, I'm not going to read it, but you should. It's a pretty short one. The moment when he was struck by some shock that he just faded away quickly after was when he saw Hyde. Hyde said, hey, watch this. And he transformed into Jekyll. And we don't know exactly why Hyde did this. Maybe he was trying to shock him. Maybe he was trying to scare him away. Or maybe he was just kind of bragging about how he has this special thing. But Lanyon was so, shaken by this that he immediately just got sick and old and died in a few days after. Now, we already knew that. We saw him die, but we just didn't know what the cause was. So now we know that he has seen Hyde transform into Jekyll. And we know that it's reliable. If somebody else said this, we might not believe it. Maybe Utterson would think they're lying or they're mistaken. But Lanyon is trustworthy and scientific, and clearly he's, he believes it because he actually was shocked when Utterson saw him, and he actually did have the effects of this. So Utterson believes it, or at least he's leaning in that direction, that somehow Hyde can transform into Jekyll, and then Utterson assumes vice versa. Now, in the final chapter, which is a long one, he reads the note from Jekyll, and Jekyll describes the whole arc of the story in a way that's like, okay, now that you've read the first 9 chapters, here's what was really going on. Like a twist at the end of a movie, you sort of go back and think, oh, now this is what was really happening. This is what they really meant the whole way through. Now, we kind of already knew, since Jekyll and Hyde is a famous story, and we probably already knew that Jekyll was transforming into Hyde and vice versa. But if you're a reader in 1886, this might be the first type of that story, the first story of that type you may have seen. So it takes a while to describe. Basically, Jekyll was almost on the psychology side of things, even though they describe him as, purely chemistry. He was almost like a little before his time and getting to Freud type thought, where he had this idea that, inside the mind are multiple personas, and there's one that's really based on urges, and it just wants to have fun and do drugs and be violent and whatever. And then there's one that's a little more good, and it has restraint and nobility and love for one's fellow man. The idea that Jekyll had was we want to take the bad stuff and separate it out and, get that into its own little cage that we can keep off to the side, and then we have our good nature as our main face. So he did that, and it worked, and the bad side was Dr. Hyde, and he could take this drug and turn into Hyde for a while and sort of get out all of his urges and then be extremely respectable during the day when he was Jekyll again. But the problem is, well, there were a couple problems. A, he kind of liked it. He enjoyed being Hyde, and he enjoyed going to the bad part of town. And it never fully describes what he does, but there must be drugs, gambling, sex, violence, all that stuff. And he doesn't want to stop. He doesn't want to now that we've got Hyde, we should kill him, or we should, separate him and put him in a little cage where he's harmless. No. Jekyll kind of enjoyed that side of things. The second problem was he started just turning into Hyde without the serum or the potion or the drug. They use a few different words throughout the story. And he started to just go to bed normal and then wake up in his Hyde form. And that's no good. And then finally, the problem was he couldn't recreate that original formula. He kept ordering ingredients and, buying various powders and chemistry implements, which was all that stuff he was having delivered in chapter 8. But it was never working. He couldn't recreate whatever he had got in the first place to bring about Hyde. And he thought it was the impurities, that there was something in the chemical that was messing it up. But then he realized, no, the original had an impurity, and we've got to find out what that was and get it back. At the end, though, he realized it wasn't going to happen, that Hyde was going to take over because he was becoming Hyde more and more. And that was going to happen before he figured out the formula and the cure. So he wrote this letter, and then he said, I'm going to take some poison to kill myself because I'm turning into Hyde right now. If I take this poison, I'll probably be Hyde by the time I'm dead, which is what happened, because when they found him on the floor, he was Hyde. So it starts out as a sort of psychological thing where he's got these two sides of his mind, and they're really, like I said, a lot like Freud, even though this was a couple decades before Freud became world famous. But then by the end, it feels more like an Incredible Hulk type of thing where, he's turning into Hyde more and more, and Hyde is this beastly figure. There are even some hints that Hyde is getting bigger, physically bigger. Every time he turns into Hyde, it's just a little bit more. And if you've ever read Alan Moore's comic book, The League of Extraordinary Gentlemen, that's the idea they take in that, which is that after a certain amount of years, Hyde is just this giant werewolf type thing with a very Incredible Hulk, rules to him. But in this one, Hyde is still kind of small. Everyone mentions that he's kind of hunched over and, looks like a weird little goblin or something. But they do hint that he would have become bigger and bigger just as he got more and more of the time in that body. So I recommend reading chapter 10. I know it's long, but it's got a lot of good stuff, and it really explains everything that happened before. So if you were reading, chapter 3 or 4, and you were thinking, what's going on? Why are they being weird? Well, chapter 10 will probably describe all of that in more detail than you hoped for. I'm going to post the quiz, okay? I was planning to we'll do a day of review and study, and then we'll do a day of the quiz. But I thought, let's just go ahead and post the quiz, because on the last one, when we read The Shadow over Innsmouth, a lot of people did much better on their second try. So if I post it now, you do your first try, and it's okay, well, you have another day to do your second one. If you're a senior, and we do have some seniors in this class, the grades are due on the 21st, which is this Friday. So I want to be ready by then. I don't want to have anyone, taking it at the last second and emailing me at midnight or something. I want to be calm, relaxed, ahead of the game. So I'm going to post this today. You don't have to do it today. If you want to read the story, watch my video, if you want, you can go on SparkNotes or Quizlet or whatever and find a little study guide. I looked at some of those and I didn't find one that I really loved. If I find something great, I'll post it. But if you want to just go out and Google, that's okay. But that's it. This is my last video post, and this quiz is going to be my last assignment or assessment. And then, next week maybe we'll do a little extra bonus thing or something, but it will not be mandatory. So that's it.